Hey, this is Alex Merced from Alex Merced Coder, and welcome to the third video in this React Parcel tutorial. So again, in the first video, we built out our boilerplate with React and Parcel, so that way you could have a cool React workspace. In the second video, we kind of built some basic components. We're not building anything in particular. We're just kind of learning some of the functionality and getting used to working with React. You get better with it the more you practice with it. But now what we're going to do is talk about state. And the way you have to kind of appreciate is that in React, data is very encapsulated. So basically, components are all sort of their own little islands. And if you want to send them data from another component, it has to be passed in as props. And if there's data that's inside the component that the component uses, that it can fall into one of two categories. It's either state or not state. Now, data that is state is basically if your component has visual elements that need to change as the data changes, you want it to be state, okay? Because what state is data that whenever it changes, React will re-update the component. And one of the cool things about React is React uses what's called a virtual DOM. So when React is running, there's this code that's kind of constantly monitoring for changes in your DOM. And it's constantly comparing its virtual version of the DOM to your real version of the DOM, and it only updates the parts that actually change. Okay, so instead of just replacing entire chunks of your website, it'll replace what changed. Now, of course, there's things you can do to make that even more efficient, and one of those things is to make sure that, to the extent that you can, you generally want your state to live in as low in your component tree. So again, think of your components as a tree. At the tip of the tree is app. And then in the next level of the tree, I have header, button. Okay, they're all one level down. Now, those components might have other components inside of them and other components inside of them. Now, what happens is if I put state in app, which I will for this video just to show you how to use state, every time the state changes, this app component re-renders along with header, button, and then any components that are inside those components will re-render, and that's a lot of re-rendering. So the idea is you want to move your state as low as possible, so that way when changes happen, only the components that need re-rendering re-render, which will make your website faster. If you're new to React, I wouldn't worry about that so much. Just worry about getting used to using state. But just so that way you understand that consideration, the idea is you want to be strategic about where you house your data. So React is easy to get started, but hard to master, because it's all about strategically setting up your data. So what we're going to do something, a simple example of state. Okay, what we're going to do is we are going to instead of props hello being where we get this information from, we're actually going to create a second H2, an H2, and this H2, what it's going to do, it's going to feed off a piece of state. Now, the way you create state is you have to use in a function. So in a class component, you actually have this object that you create called state in your constructor, and all your state data has to be in that object. In function components, you can actually create multiple individual pieces of state that are each housed in their own variable, which is really nice. And the way you do that is you just use this function, react.useState. And then here you can pass in whatever the state is. In this case, it'll just be hello world. Okay. Now the thing is that I need to be able to use this variable, and I need to be able to update this variable. So this function returns the variable, an array with the variable, and a function to update it. And you have to use the function to update it, because if you update it directly, it doesn't re-render the component. That function, what it does, it says, let me update the data, but also let me trigger this component to re-render, which we need it so that way the changes are reflected in the DOM. So how do I get those two pieces of data out of this function? You use array destructuring. You could just put it in an array, but the easiest thing to do, the convention, is to do this. So I'm going to call this piece of state I'm going to call it title, and then the function that changes it, we're going to call it to set title. Okay, it's always set, whatever the name of the variable is. That's just the convention. So that way we know which functions go with what. Okay, and then there we go. So we're saying title and set title equal the result of this function, because this function returns an array, and we are destructuring that array that comes out. So that way these have two variables. So now I can go to this H2 and say, what's inside this H2? Title. which at start is hello world. So now if I go over here, we go take a look at our updated website, we're gonna see hello world and then hello world below it. Okay, so give it a second, and there's the hello world right there. Okay, now what we're gonna do is we're gonna make it that we can update that state, and when we update that state, that's gonna update. So we're gonna use those buttons to actually change it. Okay, so here's how we do it. You can't pass a function directly down to another component, okay, especially these state functions. So any kind of hooks, so anytime anything is like React use something, okay, that's how you know it's a React hook, because it always starts with the word use. If you see anything with the word use, so in this case use state, you can't pass the resulting functions directly down to this. So I couldn't just be like, so here, instead of passing this arrow function, I can't be like, I want to pass down set title. Can't do that, it'll break. Okay, oop, let me stop that alarm. But if I do want to have that button set the title, what I have to do is use an arrow function. Okay, so you can't pass hooks down directly, but you can use an arrow function, and then the function can then be like React, oh, technically it'd be set title, and then we're going to set the title to, let's say, you know, first button clicked. Okay, and then that would work. And then I can do the same thing in the second. I can do the same thing here. And then this will be second button clicked. And then every time I click one button, it's going to change the state to that string, which will then re-render the component, and then title will reflect the changes. Okay, so save. So now this is going to update. I think it's already updated. Oh no, it's updating now. And okay, we're good. So now if I click the first one, first button clicked. I click the second one, second button clicked. Because again, we're updating the state. That's the beauty of state. Okay, because if I didn't make it a piece of state, it wouldn't update the DOM right away. So just to kind of show you that, if I were just to create a variable, const title2 equals hello, and then change this to hello world, I mean this to title2, instead of using a function, because this is not a piece of state, if I were to just change these functions to say, you know, title2 equals bleh, and this one is going to become title2 equals blarg. Save. These functions will change the variable, but the DOM won't update. So if I click on it, so I'll click on this, doot. Okay, title2 is read only. Oh, because it's const, that's right. Let's make it a let. Okay, even though I declared this as a const, what happens when you run that useState function? It's creating a new version of the variable. So that's why it works. Okay, so let's see here. Let's try that again. I'm gonna click the first one. See, nothing happens. But if I go to, I wonder if I can see it. Like I have the React Dev tool, so this is a good Google Chrome extension to download. Because when you download this, see, I can see all the different components that are there. So I can see like this, V2, these are buttons, and I can see the app component that we have state of hello world, and that hasn't changed. I guess it doesn't show me just a generic data. Okay, but bottom line is that it is changing. I am changing the title2 variable, but the DOM doesn't update because it's not state. State, that's what state does. It binds itself. So it reflects those updates. So that's the benefit of state, and that's how you use state. Okay, and if you wanted to pass state down to another component, or like pass the function down, that's how you would do it. Okay, so here's where you start getting into things that are like powerful in React. Okay, so now you know how to use props, you know how to use state in functional components. In the next video, we'll talk more about making API calls and lifecycle functions. So I'll see you guys there. Have a good one, and ciao.